If you have the courage to hear the full nightmare, stay till the end. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to uncover more terrifying stories like this. I always thought I was alone that night. The house was silent, almost unnaturally quiet. There was no wind, no creaking from the old floorboards that usually protested under even the lightest step. Everything felt different. The air was heavier than usual, like it was pressing down on me, making each breath slower, harder. I told myself I was imagining things, that the stories I had heard about this house were just that, stories. But as soon as I stepped inside, I realized this night would prove me wrong. The hallway stretched before me, longer than I remembered. Shadows clung to the walls in irregular patterns, shifting as though alive. I tried to focus on the floor, the faded carpet under my feet, anything to distract myself. But the darkness seemed to seep into my vision, curling around the edges of my eyes. It was then that I heard it. A faint sound, barely audible at first, like a whisper carried on the air. I froze. My heart started beating faster. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the empty house. Yet the whisper returned, closer this time, almost deliberate, almost human. I took a cautious step forward. The floor groaned beneath me, though no one else was there. Each step felt like it echoed through the entire house, bouncing back in distorted tones. The silence between echoes was deafening. And then came another sound, footsteps. Slow, measured, moving above me. I knew I was alone, yet the steps continued, pacing the floor above, tracing a rhythm that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I tried to convince myself it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or some small creature that had somehow found its way inside. But the steps didn't scurry. They didn't pause or change speed. They were methodical, purposeful, like someone, or something, was deliberately following a path I could not see. My palms were sweating. I felt the urge to run, but my curiosity anchored me in place. I needed to know where the sound was coming from, what it was, and whether it was real or just my mind turning against me. I moved slowly down the hallway, every nerve alert, every sense on edge. The whispering continued, now mixed with a low, almost imperceptible hum, a vibration in the walls that I could feel in my chest. It didn't make sense. How could a house hum? How could shadows shift like that when no one else was there? And yet, every instinct in me screamed that something was not right. Something was in the house, something unseen, something patient. By the time I reached the first doorway on the right, my heart was racing uncontrollably. I paused and listened. The whisper had stopped, replaced by silence so thick I could hear the faintest creak of the ceiling above. I hesitated, unsure whether to step inside or retreat. The house seemed to hold its breath with me, waiting. And in that pause, I realized that the night was no longer mine. The house had taken it, and whatever presence lingered here had already begun to claim me. I knew then that I wasn't imagining it. That whisper, those steps, the oppressive weight of the air, this was real. I had entered a place where stories became truth, and shadows were more than just the absence of light. The night had only just begun, and I had no idea how long I would survive it. That I stood there for a long moment, listening. The silence felt intentional, as if the house itself had decided to stop breathing just to see what I would do next. My pulse thudded in my ears, loud enough that I wondered if it could be heard by whatever else was inside. Slowly, I forced myself to move again. Staying still felt worse than walking forward. At least movement gave me the illusion of control. The first room was empty, completely empty. No furniture, no signs of life, just bare walls and a thin layer of dust covering the floor. Yet the air inside felt colder than the hallway, sharp against my skin. I stepped inside and waited. Nothing happened. No whisper, no footsteps, just my own breathing, uneven and shallow. For a brief moment, I felt foolish for being afraid. Maybe the stories really were just stories. Then I stepped back into the hallway. The moment I crossed the doorway, the sound returned. Not loud, never loud, but unmistakable. A faint dragging noise, like something being pulled slowly across the floor. It came from deeper inside the house, further than I could see. I turned my head, trying to pinpoint it, but the sound seemed to shift the moment I focused on it, slipping away like it didn't want to be found. I continued forward, checking each room as I went. Every room was the same, empty, cold, and wrong. The shadows inside them didn't behave normally. They stretched too far, clung too closely to the corners, as if they were anchored to something invisible. I avoided looking at them for too long. Something about them made my chest tighten, like they were waiting for me to notice them. Halfway down the hall, I felt it again. That sensation of being watched. Not imagined, felt. The kind of awareness that crawls up your spine and settles at the base of your skull. I stopped walking. The dragging sound stopped with me. That was when fear truly set in. Whatever was making that noise was paying attention. I whispered to myself that I was alone. Saying it out loud made it feel less true. I took another step. The sound resumed, closer now. I could feel a faint vibration beneath my feet, as if the house itself was responding. The walls seemed tighter, the ceiling lower. The hallway no longer felt like a passage. It felt like a corridor designed to lead me somewhere specific. At the far end, a door stood closed. I was certain it hadn't been closed before. I would have remembered. Something about that door drew my attention in a way nothing else had. The air around it felt dense, heavy, as if the space itself resisted movement. With each step toward it, the whisper returned. Not words, not yet, but a breathy murmur that brushed against my thoughts rather than my ears. I stopped a few feet away from the door. My hand hovered at my side, trembling. I didn't want to open it. Every instinct I had warned me against it. But I also knew, deep down, that this was the point of no return. The house had been guiding me here, patiently, carefully. Behind me, something shifted. I didn't turn around. I was afraid that if I did, I would see proof that I was never alone, and that whatever was in this house had finally decided to show itself. I stood frozen, my back to the hallway, my eyes locked on the closed door in front of me. Whatever had shifted behind me didn't move again, but its presence lingered like a pressure against my skin. I could feel it there, close enough to matter. Turning around felt impossible. Some instinct deep inside me warned that once I faced it, there would be no pretending anymore. The whisper grew clearer as I stood there. Still not words, just sound shaped like intent. It slipped into my thoughts, brushing against memories, pulling at fragments of fear I didn't know I carried. My breathing slowed, not because I was calm, but because something about the air demanded it. Every breath felt measured, controlled, as if the house itself decided when I was allowed to inhale. I reached for the door. The moment my fingers touched the surface, the whisper stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. It felt absolute, heavy enough to crush thought. I waited, my hand still resting against the door, listening for anything. Footsteps, breathing, movement, but there was nothing. No hum, no drag, no presence behind me. Just the sound of my own heartbeat, fast and uneven. I pushed the door open. The room beyond was darker than the hallway, the shadows inside thick and unmoving. It smelled old, like dust and something faintly metallic. I stepped inside slowly, half expecting the door to slam shut behind me, but it remained open. For a moment, nothing happened. The room felt empty in the same way the others had, cold, hollow, abandoned. Then I felt it. That familiar sensation of being watched returned, stronger than before. It wasn't coming from one direction. It was everywhere. The walls, the corners, the ceiling. I felt exposed, like I had stepped into a place that was never meant to be seen, let alone entered. I took another step, and something shifted in the darkness. Not a shape, not a figure, just movement, subtle, almost polite, as if whatever was there didn't want to startle me yet. I stood still, my eyes straining to adjust, my mind racing through explanations that no longer made sense. A sound broke the silence. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was breathing. Slow, controlled, close. The realization hit me all at once, sharp and cold. That sound wasn't echoing through the house. It was coming from inside the room, from somewhere just beyond where I could see. I backed away instinctively, my foot brushing against the doorframe. The breathing stopped the moment I moved. I waited. Seconds passed. Maybe minutes. Time felt unreliable here, stretched thin and warped. I forced myself to listen, to focus. And that was when I understood something that made my stomach drop. The breathing hadn't stopped. It had synchronized with mine. Every inhale I took was mirrored. Every exhale followed. Whatever was in the room wasn't just nearby. It was paying attention, studying me, learning my rhythm. I felt a wave of panic rise, hot and sudden, but I swallowed it down. Panic would only make things worse. Somehow I knew that. I stepped backward into the hallway, never taking my eyes off the darkness. The moment I crossed the threshold, The pressure lifted slightly. The room didn't follow me. The door didn't move. But the presence did not disappear. As I stood there, shaking, one thought settled into my mind with terrifying clarity. The room didn't trap people. It invited them. I stepped farther down the hallway, putting distance between myself and the room, but the relief was shallow and temporary. The house felt different now. Not quieter, aware. As if crossing that threshold had altered something fundamental, not just in the space around me, but in the way I was being perceived. I had the unsettling sense that I had been noticed, properly noticed, for the first time. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. The air felt thicker here, warmer somehow, carrying a faint vibration that I could feel rather than hear. When I opened my eyes again, the hallway looked the same, but the shadows had shifted. They were closer, pressed tighter against the edges of doors, stretched longer across the floor. They no longer felt passive. I started walking again, slower this time. Each step felt deliberate, measured. I didn't want to surprise the house, or whatever lived inside it. That thought alone sent a chill through me. I was no longer thinking of the sounds as random. They had intent, pattern, awareness. That was when I noticed something unsettling. The footsteps returned, but they weren't above me anymore. They were behind me. Not loud, not rushed, just close enough to be undeniable. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped. My chest tightened. I took a step forward. They followed. Perfectly timed. Whatever was there had learned my pace. I didn't turn around. I told myself that seeing it would make it real in a way I wasn't ready for. As long as it remained unseen, there was still distance, still denial. But the sound stayed with me, matching every movement, every pause. It wasn't chasing me. It didn't need to. It knew I wasn't leaving. The whisper returned, clearer now, closer to language than noise. Still not words, but shaped with intention. It slid along the edges of my thoughts, brushing against memories I hadn't thought about in years. Regret, fear, loneliness. I felt exposed in a way I couldn't explain, like something was sorting through me, deciding what parts mattered. I reached the end of the hallway and turned a corner. The footsteps did the same. No delay, no mistake. My breathing became shallow. The house felt narrower here, the walls closer together. I could feel a faint pressure against my temples, like hands resting just out of sight. I tried to focus on something solid, something real, but even my thoughts felt unstable, slipping away before I could finish them. Then the sound changed. The footsteps slowed, not to match me, but to lead. I realized, with a quiet surge of dread, that I was no longer being followed. I was being guided. The presence moved ahead of me now, just out of view, its pace steady and confident. It wanted me to continue. And despite every instinct screaming otherwise, I did. At the end of the corridor, another door waited. Smaller than the first. Older. The air around it felt heavy in a familiar way. My stomach dropped. I had been here before, or at least, part of me had. The sensation was unmistakable. As I reached for the handle, the whisper stopped completely. Behind me, the house went still. I understood then that whatever lived here didn't need to force anything anymore. It had learned me. My fear, my curiosity, my hesitation, and it knew exactly how to use them. My hand rested on the handle, unmoving. I could feel a faint vibration beneath my fingers, not strong enough to be sound, but real enough to notice. The door felt warmer than the air around it, as if something on the other side had been waiting there for a long time. I hesitated, listening for any sign that the house might react, but it didn't. The silence felt deliberate, expectant. I slowly turned the handle. The door opened without resistance. Inside, the room was small and empty, just like the others. No furniture, no markings on the walls, nothing that explained the weight pressing down on my chest. I stepped inside cautiously, every nerve alert, waiting for the moment something revealed itself. But nothing happened. The air was still. The shadows remained fixed in place. For a brief, dangerous moment, I felt relief. Then the door closed behind me. Not violently, not suddenly. It simply shut, as if guided by an unseen hand that knew exactly how much force to use. I turned around immediately, my heart racing, and reached for the handle. It didn't move. I pulled harder. Nothing. The door was locked. The air in the room shifted. It became heavier, denser, pressing against my skin. My ears filled with a low, almost imperceptible sound, like a distant vibration deep underground. I could feel it in my bones. The wall seemed closer now, not physically moving, but changing in a way I couldn't measure. The room felt smaller, more contained. That was when the whisper returned. This time, it formed words. Not spoken aloud, but clear enough that I understood them. They didn't come from a single direction. They came from everywhere at once, layered and calm. You stayed. The realization sent a wave of cold through me. This wasn't a question. It was an observation. Something had noticed my choice, had recognized hesitation and curiosity as permission. I backed away until my shoulders pressed against the wall. The vibration grew stronger, pulsing slowly, like a heartbeat. I tried the door again. Still nothing. The whispers continued, quiet but persistent. They didn't threaten. They didn't demand. They narrated. They described my fear with unsettling accuracy, tracing thoughts I hadn't spoken, emotions I hadn't admitted even to myself. It felt like being seen too clearly, like standing in front of something that understood me better than I did. The lights flickered. For just a second, the shadows shifted, and in that movement, I saw it. Not a face, not a body, just a shape where no shape should have been. A distortion in the darkness, bending space around it, occupying the room without truly existing inside it. I gasped, and the whisper reacted immediately. The vibration spiked. The pressure intensified. The shape moved closer, not by stepping, but by expanding, as if distance no longer applied. I squeezed my eyes shut, my thoughts racing, panic clawing its way to the surface. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The vibration faded. The whispers fell silent. The pressure lifted just enough for me to breathe again. When I opened my eyes, the room looked empty once more. Ordinary, deceptively harmless. The door unlocked with a soft click. I stood there, shaking, unsure whether to leave or stay frozen in place. I knew, with terrifying certainty, that whatever had been in the room had not disappeared. It had simply finished observing. And now, it was deciding what to do with me that I didn't wait to see if the door would lock again. The moment I felt it give way, I pulled it open and stepped back into the hallway. The air outside the room felt thinner, easier to breathe, but the relief was shallow. Something had changed. I could feel it in the way the house settled around me, like a quiet acknowledgement of my exit. The hallway looked the same, yet wrong in subtle ways. The shadows no longer clung to corners. They stretched across the floor in long, uneven shapes, reaching toward me as I walked. I moved carefully, listening for footsteps, for whispers, for anything that confirmed I was no longer alone. But there was nothing, just silence, and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. That silence didn't feel empty. It felt attentive. I made my way back the way I had come, retracing my steps through the narrow corridors. Each doorway I passed felt like a watching eye. I resisted the urge to look inside them again. Whatever had invited me deeper into the house had no reason to hide anymore. It had already learned enough. Halfway down the hall, I felt it. A pressure at my back, light but unmistakable. Not a touch, more like the awareness of space being occupied. I stopped walking. The pressure stopped too. I swallowed hard and forced myself to continue. It followed, slowly, patiently. The realization settled into my chest with quiet dread. The presence wasn't tied to the room. It hadn't been confined at all. That room wasn't a prison. It was a place of introduction, a threshold, and I had crossed it willingly. The temperature dropped as I moved closer to the entrance. The walls seemed farther apart here, stretched and distorted, as if the house itself was reshaping around me. I could hear a faint sound now, not a whisper, not footsteps, but something closer to breathing, too slow to be mine. I didn't turn around. I knew, instinctively, that whatever followed me didn't need to be seen to be real. When the front door came into view, a surge of hope cut through my fear. The outside world waited just beyond it. Light, air, distance. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding harder with every step. The sound behind me grew louder, closer, more defined. Just before I reached the door, it stopped. The pressure vanished. I froze, my hand hovering inches from the handle. The sudden absence felt wrong, like stepping off a stair you expected to be there. The house felt too quiet again, stretched thin with anticipation. For a moment, I considered running, throwing the door open and never looking back. But something stopped me. A thought that wasn't mine settled into my mind, calm and certain. You can leave. It won't. I understood then that the choice was no longer about escape. Leaving the house didn't mean leaving the presence. It meant carrying it with me. Whatever had learned me in that room had no interest in being confined to walls and corridors. I opened the door and stepped outside. The night air hit my face, cold and sharp, grounding me in a reality that felt suddenly fragile. I closed the door behind me and stood there, listening. No sound followed. No shadow crossed the doorway. But as I walked away, a familiar sensation returned. The feeling of being watched. Not from the house. From somewhere much closer. I kept walking, even though every instinct told me to stop and look back. The street was empty, stretched long and silent under the night sky. Houses stood on either side, dark and still, their windows reflecting faint light like unblinking eyes. Everything looked normal. Too normal. That was what unsettled me most. The feeling followed me. Not heavy, not threatening, just present, like a shadow that didn't belong to any light source. I tried to tell myself it was just my nerves, the aftermath of fear finally catching up to me. But deep down, I knew better. The awareness moved with me, perfectly aligned, never ahead, never behind. I reached my car and stopped, my hand resting on the door. For a moment, I listened. The night offered nothing. No footsteps, no whispers, no breath that wasn't my own. The absence felt intentional, controlled. Whatever had followed me no longer needed sound. I got inside and shut the door. The interior light flicked on briefly, illuminating the familiar space. Everything was where it should be. I started the engine, grateful for the noise, the vibration, the reminder that something mechanical and predictable still existed. As I drove away, the house disappeared from view, swallowed by darkness. The feeling didn't fade. At the first red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face looked pale, drawn, unfamiliar. For a split second, I thought I saw something shift behind my eyes, something that didn't belong there. I blinked and it was gone. My reflection returned to normal, but my heart kept racing. I told myself I was safe now. That was when I heard the sound. Not from outside. From inside the car. A soft exhale, barely audible, close enough to brush against my ear. I froze, my foot tightening on the brake. The engine hummed. The streetlight glowed overhead. I was not alone. The sound didn't repeat. It didn't need to. Its purpose was already served. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as the light turned green. I drove on, forcing myself not to react, not to acknowledge it. Acknowledgement felt dangerous. When I finally reached home, relief washed over me in cautious waves. This place was familiar, safe, grounded in routines and memories untouched by that house. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, breathing deeply, listening. Nothing. I moved through the rooms, turning on lights, grounding myself in small, ordinary actions. Everything felt normal. Slowly, the tension eased. The feeling faded into the background, distant enough to ignore. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, waiting. Eventually, exhaustion won. Just before sleep took me, a thought drifted through my mind. Quiet, uninvited, certain. It knows where you live now. I woke suddenly, heart pounding, the room dark and silent. For a long moment, I lay still, listening for proof that the thought had been nothing more than a dream. Then, from somewhere just beyond the edge of my hearing, something breathed. In perfect time with me. I stayed still, barely daring to breathe. The sound faded again, leaving behind a silence that felt stretched and fragile, like it could tear at any moment. I told myself it had been a half-dream, my mind replaying fear in familiar shapes. That explanation almost worked. Almost. But the awareness remained, quiet and settled, like something that had found its place and saw no reason to announce itself anymore. The days that followed felt wrong in subtle ways. Life continued as it always had. Work, conversations, routines, but everything felt slightly misaligned, as if I were walking a step out of sync with the world around me. Sounds lingered longer than they should have. Rooms felt occupied even when they were empty. And always, just beneath my thoughts, there was the sense of being observed. It never rushed me. That was the worst part. At night, when the house grew quiet, I would lie awake listening. Sometimes I thought I heard breathing. Sometimes I didn't. Either way, I felt it there, close enough to matter. I avoided mirrors after dark. Reflections felt unreliable now, prone to subtle delays that might reveal something I wasn't ready to see. I never heard whispers again. Not like before. Whatever had followed me didn't need them. It had learned enough in that room, in that house, on that night. It understood patience. It understood me. Weeks passed, then months. The feeling never left. Occasionally, I would wake with the certainty that something had been standing beside my bed, close enough to reach out. I never opened my eyes during those moments. I learned quickly that looking was an invitation. Silence was safer. Stillness was safer. One evening, as I sat alone, a thought surfaced, calm, familiar, unwelcome. You haven't forgotten. It wasn't a voice. It didn't need to be. The meaning settled into me effortlessly, as if it had always been there. I understood then that the house had never been the point. The rooms, the shadows, the sounds, they were tools. Filters. Ways to narrow down the kind of mind that would listen instead of run. I had listened. Sometimes I think about going back. The idea arrives quietly, dressed as curiosity, as closure. I imagine standing in that hallway again, facing the door at the end, finishing whatever was started. The thought feels almost comforting. That terrifies me, because I know now that the sound was never meant to trap me. It was meant to follow, to echo, to remind me that some things, once noticed, cannot be unseen. Tonight, as I sit here, the room feels calm, ordinary, safe, but the air is heavy in that familiar way, and my breathing feels measured, controlled. I pause, listening. Somewhere very close, something listens back, and I understand the truth at last. The sound never stopped. It only learned when to be quiet. If this story felt too familiar, you're not alone. Let me know. If you enjoyed this horror story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell icon for more terrifying stories.